Hello everybody, this is General Yanis, and today in Death Guard Tactics I will be talking about deployment and some general and more Death Guard related deployment tactics and strategies and considerations to make. So let's get started. So deployment is a very important part of Warhammer 40k game and very often is a key to a successful battle outcome. And especially if we have a poor deployment, it may leave our army very exposed and make it difficult for us to score objectives, and maybe basically with poor deployment you can basically lose the game before it even starts. And I personally have struggled in a couple of games because of poor deployment, and yeah, it's interesting playing more games and get more experience that how you can improve your deployment. So in this video I will be going through some general deployment considerations, and specifically for Death Guard units, and deployment for primary and secondary objectives. And of course, I'm not claiming that there is an optimal deployment. The optimal deployment will of course vary a lot from game to game based on the actual map and the actual terrain, the opponent, the own army, the opponent's army, etc. This is just to give more some considerations and some thoughts to use in planning your deployment. So a special big thanks to my patrons for supporting this work and bringing valuable input for this topic for deployment. So let's take a look. So general deployment considerations in matched play, as you know, first the players declare any units that will not be deployed on the map. For example, units that will be on deep strike, that have deep strike abilities or be in strategic reserves, always start embarked on transports. Deployment then starts with a defender placing the first unit, and then the players alternate deploying one unit at a time. This is also a quite tactical part of the deployment. And keep in mind at this stage you don't know who's going to start the game. So you don't know who goes first, so it's very important to consider the highly likely outcome that you could go second. So for example, here is one of my early games, an example of a poor deployment. We're playing a map with this type of deployment zone, and basically I put all my units out in the open and just going after the objectives, but I lost the first turn, and then my opponent's Doomsday Arcs, they just blasted my army to pieces before I did a lot of things. So this also is to learn that, yeah, if I had won the first turn, maybe I could have maybe it would have been okay, but it was not optimal here. So of course it was one of my first games, and of course a painful lesson, but at least I will not be doing similar deployment in the future. So a rather texty slide here, but so some of the general deployment tips here. Very important: deploy with the mindset of probably going second. This is I tend to forget this. I'm looking a bit more aggressively at how to move my units, but there is a very high chance that the opponent goes first, and then it's not optimal then if you are very exposed like I was on the previous picture. Of course, use terrain to your advantage. For example, forests, line of sight, blocking terrain, ruins, craters to your advantage. These can be used to either fully hide your units or making them harder to kill. For example, if they are inside ruins, craters, they get cover save, improvement to the armor save, or if they are behind forest, they are -1 to hit, and this whole improves the durability of our units if the opponent goes first. For controlling backfield objectives, you need to do that. Consider if the objective can be controlled from a hidden or covered position rather than having the units exposed, or they can be hidden and then they can move out to be close in control of the backfield objective. Then faster units and units that you plan to move up the middle ground so they can reach and take over objectives outside of your deployment zone. If you can place them in such a way so that they can reach this after turn 1, it can be really good, because then you are you are taking this objective, and you can start scoring from turn 2. So it's important to check the distance to the objective. So typically this is 12 inch, and then you have to be within 3 inch to control the objective. Then you can take so 12 minus 3 inch, for example, then minus the movement of the unit, and then what is left you need to cover with an advance roll if you want to go there from the first turn. If your opponent has forward deployment units, and that he can put in the middle ground, let's say, and if he has very fast units that can come across and get into melee with your units maybe very fast if they go first turn, consider keeping space between your units, more than 3 inches, for the consolidation and the pile-in, let's say, so the opponent cannot easily tag units you don't want to have tagged. So for example, I had some examples where I had some infantry and then some cannons or artillery behind, and then if I was charged, then the opponent could do it and then pile into, or consolidate into my vehicles, prohibiting me from shooting. So it's important to think if your opponent can bridge the gap very quickly and come at you, you might need to think about this. If then after all this and considering, if you win the dice roll and then you have the choice of if you want to go first or second, consider giving your opponent even the first turn if you already have covered your units very well, and your opponent maybe also is very well covered. If your opponent is very exposed, then you could start killing him off from killing off his units from turn 1. But if there are not good targets and you are quite hidden, then go ahead and maybe give the opponent the start turn, because they cannot do so much damage to you. And then on the second turn, when you get the second, you go second, you will have much more targets going after. So this is quite interesting. It's not only going first that is the best, maybe if you have a good deployment, of course. If your opponent has put dangerous units in deep strike and strategic reserves, consider your deployment and the first turn move to deny space where you don't want them to come in. Let's say if you have some important unit you need to keep protected or something, try to keep the other units with 9 inch aura, let's say, so that they cannot easily, the opponent cannot easily deep strike and get to where you don't want them to be. If you can screen out, then you can maybe funnel them to come where you want to have them. Of course, I don't think you can cover the whole board, but at least you can have some idea where you don't want to have them, and try to deny them from being there by having your own units and denying the area where you don't want them to come in. And of course, as the deployment is alternating one unit at a time, you can try to be a bit tactical in which units you place first, so your opponent can commit first, let's say. And what I mean by that, that for example, if your opponent has chosen the objective to kill your warlord or something else, let's say, consider to wait deploying your warlord so you don't commit quickly where your warlord will be, and maybe your opponent then can focus on that side. But it's not very easy to do this. But consider just keeping the most valuable assets or what is important to committing as late as possible, so you can see where is your opponent deploying. Is he going with a lot of vehicles on the right and put anti-vehicle there and so on? But yeah, it's a cat and mouse game, this one. Then if we go to some death card deployment considerations, here I have just been looking at the units that we have in the death card arsenal, and for different roles and how to deploy. So normally a good army, you would need to have something to hold the backfield objectives to score the primary objective points. And normally this is good, nicely done with some cheap infantry. And in our arsenal we have the smallest unit of poxwalkers that will, for example, be 10 poxwalkers for 70 points or 10 cultists for 60 points. The cheapest plague marine squad would be 5 with only bolters and knives for 90 points. The advantage of the infantry for holding backfield objectives, of course, the cheaper the price you can do. They have the objective secure, that that even if opponent deep strikes and comes with some more elite unit, they need to kill everything until before they can take the objective. And infantry can also be used to do actions for secondaries, for example, raise banners. Also, another thing to think about for holding backfield objectives, for example, sometimes I use plague burst scrollers with entropy cannons for long range support, and they will be staying in the backfield and not advancing. Then those could be used to hold the objectives. Of course, straightforward here, but of course they don't have objectives secured. If something comes closer and can charge them, then they could maybe take over the objective. But yeah, it could be an option. If you keep some of the vehicles in the backfield, they can keep in the objectives. Then for forward deployment, we only can do that and deploy outside our deployment zone currently only if we have taken allied detachment with chaos demons and use nurglings. But this is, as rules seem to be now, we would be losing the contagions, the -1 toughness aura bringing allies. So let's see what the codex will say here, or if we could get some unit of our own codex that would have a forward deployment. It would be really good if poxwalkers could do that, like the zombie stratagem of the harbingers. And then of course we need to consider units to deploy them to advance and take midfield, let's say, objectives. Here I think some of the best choices are plague marines with special weapons like flails and support characters, and these groups of plague marines with support characters like plague surgeon or plague casters or the Tallyman or Noxious Blightbringer with different relics and Arch Contaminator and so on, or the grenade spam and etc. They can be with and without a transport. The plague marines are durable and they can take objectives and they can hold them and they have objectives secured. We also have then, let's say, task forces with the Demon Prince, and then he's a fast unit, and then we have fast and melee capable demon engines like blow drones, Mephitic Blight Holders, Defilers, or Plague Burst Scrollers with speeders. Those could be some units moving up, deployed to move up and take some of the objectives we need to take to win the game. And of course, hard melee hitting infantry and beasts like Possessed and Chaos Spawn could be also an option to go upfield. And then, of course, in our arsenal, we have some units with deep strike abilities like the Lord of Contagion, Typhus, our Terminators, Blightlord and Deathstar Terminators. And then we can now again take the Terex Assault Drill, including its content. It can be deep strike from turn 2. And as I said before, Harbinger, Poxwalkers. If we take the Harbinger, then we have Poxwalkers could also for some command points be a deep strike, maximum 2 units. And of course our transports are the Chaos Rhino and the Terex Assault Drill. So some specific deployment considerations for some of our units. For example, our Plague Burst Scroller, it has the mortar which can shoot without line of sight. And this allows Plague Burst Scrollers to hide, let's say. They can be fully kept hidden and they can still continue doing some damage from the mortar. That is, for example, one thing we can do with the Plague Burst Scrollers. In a completely different role, our Plague Burst Scrollers, preferably then armed with speeders instead of the entropy cannons, can be used to go forward and screen our infantry. Infantry can basically hide a line of sight behind the Plague Burst Scroller large model, and the Plague Burst Scroller takes a lot of space, and it can maybe cover for some of the opponents, and it's very tough and can survive until our infantry can take objectives and catch up. The Mephitic Blight Holders are also very good in the respect that they give cover aura to infantry wholly within 7 inches, and consider this to your advantage. For example, sometimes we need to hold a backfield objective or to take some objective that is maybe in the open and we cannot be and we are exposed by taking it. So this is quite good to deploy within, let's say, the protection of the Mephitic Blight Holder, and use then the Mephitic Blight Holder to carry the protection of the terrain going forward. And then we also have the new miasmatic malignifier, or what now it's called, the new building, the fortification that we will get. This Death Guard specific terrain is quite interesting, and it can also give cover and -1 to hit if we are already in cover, and has the 9-inch aura of the -1 toughness. So this is quite interesting to think in terms of deployment. If you are taking such a terrain, consider this to put somewhere on the midfield to create a zone of cover, for example here close to the objective for our units, and put also the enemy in disadvantage in this unit with -1 toughness. So this can be quite strategically used in our deployment. And of course, Foul Blightspawn, he has this aura that units that charge do not fight first. So this could be quite interesting in deploying and using this aura if we have some infantry that maybe the opponent can charge already very quickly, that we have the Foul Blightspawn protecting them with his aura so that at least they could fight first. And if you have, for example, Marines with flails, they can do quite considerable damage if they fight first. Continuing the deployment considerations and primary objectives. Of course, scoring primary objectives starts from the beginning of turn 2, and it's very important, of course, to winning the games. If you cannot take control of, normally you get 5 points for holding one objective, 10 points for holding 2, and 15 points if you hold more than your opponent. So if you need at least to take one objective, and you hope preferably you would like to take 3 objectives and try, and if you can score these primaries and you deny your opponent a lot of primary points, you would typically be winning the game. So it's very important to start controlling objectives already from the end of turn 1, because then in your beginning of turn 2 you will be scoring those. And looking at strike force size battles as an example, here are just the 6 from the core book, but of course we have the grand tournament. But yeah, all in all we have similar scenarios that normally there is one backfield objective to hold, and sometimes in some maps there are basically 2. And the objectives between the deployment zones are typically 12 inches. The distance from our deployment zone to those are typically 12 inches away. And our base movement of most of our units is 5 inches. So in this case, to cover a 12-inch distance, we would need a 12 minus 3 inch. Of course, we need to be within 3 inch of the objective. Minus the 5-inch movement, we would need a 4-inch advance roll to reach in turn 1 if we can move in a straight line and there is no terrain obstructing us from doing so. So this is only, let's say, 50% the chance without re-rolling. If we have the Noxious Blightbringer allowing us to use 2 dice roll for the advance, we have a 75% chance to do that without the re-roll. So then, of course, this could be considered to have a group of Plague Marines with a Noxious Blightbringer to be able to come close to this objective. Of course, we could also have, of course, a transport for the infantry. If the terrain allows, the Rhino can have a larger range, and then it can carry the Plague Marines, but the Plague Marines can first disembark from turn 2, and the Rhino doesn't have objective secured. Faster units like Mephitic Blightholders can go 10 inches and could reach there without advancing if terrain allows, but they don't have objective secured. Fly units can reach there easier because there is no terrain that can block them, let's say. So we have the Greater Blight Drone from Forge World that we can use. It is the fastest unit, 14 inch, that allows us to come into control of basically any of the midfield objectives already from turn 1. Blow drones can also fly 10 inches, and the Demon Prince with wings can fly 12 inches. As I said, transport units for the infantry, if the terrain allows it, they can go through here. One thing to consider is you could have, for example, Mephitic Blightholders going towards the objective, and then you have the Plague Marines following behind. You can use Cloud of Flies to protect the infantry from being shot at by the enemy if they are not the closest model, and then the opponent has to shoot the Mephitic Blightholders, for example. And in some missions, some midfield objectives are even closer than 12 inches. For example, here we have 10 inches and 4 inches, which makes here we have very close to our deployment zone. So it's even easier, and we can reach there without advancing, and it's more safe, so we can get our objectives quickly. If our opponent moves first, or has unit forward deployed close to these objectives, we can also use this to our advantage, because then we can move and maybe have a charge roll, so we can bring, with the charging and piling in and consolidating, we can reach and take objectives that basically have been moving further than if they were not there. And then finally, some deployment considerations and secondary objectives. A lot of the secondary objectives are about targeting some specific opponents or killing more units, attritions, and so on. Those are not, there is no general deployment consideration there. For example, assassinated. There is nothing specific to say about deployment there. If your opponent chooses such secondaries, then you can consider protecting some of these type of units they are going after, for example, vehicles, but normally it's tough to do because you want your vehicles to do something else, take objectives, for example. If you choose while we stand, we fight, which requires you to, you score points if your units survive, then you can consider keeping those hidden. For example, plague burst crawlers with a mortar, they can be hidden, and they could be the while we stand, we fight. And if you have 3 of those and they survive the battle, you get 15 victory points from this objective. Then if we move to some secondary objectives that are affected by deployment, of course we have one that comes to mind, is engage on all fronts, which is in the battlefield supremacy category. In this secondary objective, you get 2 victory points by the end of the turn if you have units wholly within 3 table quarters, or 3 victory points if you are in 4 quarters. And this has to be outside 6 inches outside of the center, so you can't have them all in the center, of course. And this is quite interesting because from the get-go, for most battles, you are already in 2 table quarters. And then you typically need to move 12 inches is normally the distance to the middle line. To go to another table quarter, you need to move typically 12 inches plus the base size of the model. And if you can do that with 2 units, like for example here, you move 2 bloat drones or greater blight drones here, then you already from turn 1 have scored 3 victory points, which is quite good. So yeah, greater blight drones with 14-inch move, they can do this. The Demon Prince with wing can also do this if he advances. The bloat drones also, they need to advance and they need to hit more than they need to hit a 4 or higher. Again, a Noxious Blightbringer or some reroll could help this. But if you move too far ahead for engage all fronts, maybe it can leave you too exposed in turn 1. But at least from turn 2, you should be able to be on several quarters. In the map with this type of deployment, where you are starting on opposite edges, you only start on 1 table quarter, but it's interesting because you can just get 3 table quarters just by moving some units. You don't even need to advance. So here you have a 10-inch move. You can move Plague Marines just here, or Hemiphytic Blightholder 10-inch. You can move something in here. You are already in 3 table quarters. You will be getting 2 victory points. And then if you want to go for the 3 victory points, you need to move to this table quarter and be outside 6 inches of the center. So in this case, you need to move like the triangle hypotenuse is here, and using the Pythagorean theorem, you need to move, the right angles here is 9-inch and 6-inch. You would need to move 11 inches plus the base size. So it's possible, for example, for a bloat drone that is advancing, to be able to get 3 victory points already from turn 1 in such kind of map. If you use Nurglings, so you have the forward positions deployment, you can get this already in turn 1. You could have one group of Nurglings here and one here. You already can get it. It's better to deploy, let's say, a bit less than 6 inches behind the table quarter, and then advancing them to get the points, so they are not too close for your opponent to take advantage of when they start. So so with forward deployment, it's quite easy to score engage on all fronts. Another battlefield supremacy is the line breaker. secondary objective, and this you score 4 victory points at the end of your turn if you have 2 units wholly within the opponent's deployment zone. And this should be quite possible to achieve. It's also important that you get it at the end of your own turn. It should be possible already from turn 2 if you have 2 deep striking units, for example Blight Lord, 2 units of Blight Lord Terminators. You just deep strike them in the your opponent's deployment zone. You should be able to be getting that unless the opponent screens the whole deployment zone. Of course, if they have a lot of units, then you cannot land somewhere there, but normally it should be possible at least from turn 2 or turn 3 to do this. And then shadow operations, we have the raise banners high secondary objective. Here the infantry can perform an action. All infantry units close to an objective can do this if they didn't advance, and the action is completed at the end of their own turn. And remember that Nurglings are not infantry and cannot raise banners. But our infantry then, when the banner is lifted, the banner are giving 1 victory point each at the start of our own turn and at the end of the game. So this is really good for maps with a lot of backfield objectives and objectives that are very close to your own deployment zone that you can reach with movement only and don't need to advance. So in the 2 shown examples maps here, for example in this map, you can start, you have 2 infantry units here, and then already from the first turn they raise the banners in these two locations, and you from turn 2 you already score 2 points unless your opponent magically can take them from you. But if you have your own objective secure infantry here, maybe Mephitic Blightholder to cover, you already would have, let's say, 2 banners here. And in this map you have even shorter, you have 1 backfield objective you can do this for, and then you have 2 objectives very close to your deployment zone. Here it's only 4-inch distance, so you can have Plague Marines, for example, moving up on both, and then at the end of your movement you can raise 3 banners here. So this is quite good already from turn 1. Finally, deploy Scramblers secondary objective, also shadow operations. So this is from the Grand Tournament book. So this scores you 10 victory points at the end of the game if you have deployed the Scramblers action 3 times in the game, and 1 needs to be in your own deployment zone, 1 in the opponent deployment zone, and 1 in the middle 6 inch away from deployment zones. This action can be attempted by 1 infantry unit and is completed at the end of own turn. This is also quite important because your opponent cannot stop you when you start doing this action. And the own zone, you can do it basically in first turn by the backfield holding infantry. You could have a unit of Poxwalkers behind some terrain here close to this objective. They just do the Scramblers. The opponent's zone should be possible in turn 2 if you can deep strike some unit. 2 or 3 if you deep strike, and then you after deep striking you can do the action instead of charging. And also the middle should be possible from turn 2. Let's say a unit of Plague Marines have moved towards the center field objectives, or in a Rhino they go out, and then they can do this. So this should be possible to get 10 victory points, and if you have especially a deep striking unit. So summary and some final thoughts from this video. So I think deployment is a very important part of Warhammer 40k. Consider in general for deployment that the fact that you might be going second, which was something I had to learn the hard way. Use terrain to your advantage to protect your units, so you're not very exposed from your opponent getting a turn 1. Plan ahead what units should go after objectives and how to get there, preferably already from turn 1 to secure objectives so you can start scoring from turn 2. And know and plan your Death Guard units, your Death Guard armies, with the units necessary to keep backfield objectives, capturing the objectives, deep striking units if you want to use those, and the fast advancing, let's say, fast units, or the vehicles and so on that can go quick up the field. And some of the secondary objectives have very high synergies with deployment, for example engage on all fronts or deploy Scramblers or something like this. This concludes this video. What do you think about deployment, and do you have some tips and ideas that I didn't cover here, or what are your thoughts of all this? If you like this video, please press like and subscribe to the channel, and if you want to further support the channel, please visit the Patreon page, General Yanis. And with these words, General Yanis is signing out. Stay safe out there, and bye bye.